Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Happiness in Higher Ed. This is episode number 15, and my name is John Hill. I use he, him pronouns, and today my guest is Antonio Robinson. And before I formally introduce, I don't know why I keep doing this, but here we are. I am going to read off our mission statement. So, in a world that can be engulfed in darkness, we must shine bright and lead the change for a better future. As we continue to shape and challenge emerging adults' minds, it is also our duty to reflect and remember what makes us happy and why we continue to do the work that we do. So without further ado, I would like to formally introduce Antonio Robinson. Tony Robinson brings both East Coast charm and Midwest insight to life here in California. With a passion for supporting students, building community, and enhancing scholarship, Antonio has long been a proponent. Proponent. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm just
making it work.
I have a master's degree.
Add it to the vocab.
I can read. A proponent for creating a positive connection between an individual's living and learning environment. As such, he joined the field of higher education and student affairs several years ago and has yet to look back. Before starting at Stanford, Antonio worked professionally at California State University, Monterey Bay, where I met Antonio, and also the college living experience, also in Monterey, California. Each of those roles allowed for Antonio to dedicate his time, effort, and attention to supporting the various needs of college students within that area. Even so, over the course of his career, Antonio has worked in a wide variety of functional areas in university offices. These offices have included student housing and residential life departments, multicultural education centers, an office of student ethics, offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the office of the president, the Office of Admissions, and even the Office of Communications and Marketing too. With all of that in mind, Antonio remains extremely proud to build relationships and mentor a diverse community of scholars on a daily basis. These responsibilities and many more should provide you with a glimpse of precisely how and why Antonio is truly dedicated to changing the field of academic and student affairs. Whew, that is a bio. I'd love to hear it. Would you like to add anything else?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Feels good to always, kind of think about how it'll sound to other folks, but hey, it sounded good from my end.
Yeah, no, I think that was my bad for that one word that now I have added to my list. So I appreciate that.
There we go.
Yes. Mm-hmm. All right, so we will just roll into the questions then. So the first question that I have for you is, what was the reason you started to pursue a career in higher education?
Yeah, I think this is one of those questions that everybody gets at some point in time in their career. And I've always been that person who listens to people so that way I can try to find a unique way of saying it. But the reality is there's no unique way of actually saying that. I fell right into the field. I actually had some good mentors, some good people who really told me all about what student affairs would look like before I got into it. And I think aside from that, I really do think that at the time I was an undergrad, I consider myself an alphabet man just due to all the acronyms and things that I actually had attached to my name. But when you factor in that being in student affairs means that you're going to get involved in a lot of offices, which obviously you now are aware of. I think for me, it was something that I actually enjoyed doing. So I like being able to go into whether it was Office of Communications and Marketing and talk about some of the admissions programs or outlook or outreach that we would share. Going into offices of diversity and inclusion and talking about programs that help communities that didn't see themselves on campus from time to time. Going into be that the office of the president and talking to some of the higher level administrators about the outlook for not only that year, that semester, but the next 5 years, right? So I think those are some of the big things that for me, I just enjoy doing. I got to do a lot of that as an undergrad, and those experiences only really expanded once I went to grad school, once I then became a professional and such. So for me, I think that alphabet soup of, we'll say, acronyms, jobs, titles, positions was helpful. I think at one point I was an RA, an OM, which is an office manager, an SEA, which is a student engagement advisor. I was an FYS peer mentor, which is our first year seminar, our first year series of experiences. And then I also was a part of MISA, which for those of you who are in higher ed and student affairs, MISA was something I did as an undergrad that actually just was mentoring educators in student affairs. So lots of acronyms, lots of alphabets, lots of titles and such, but across the board, it really gave me a good snippet of all the different functional areas that were involved in higher ed, but also the ways in which I could see myself doing that in the future. So lots of fun for sure.
Got you. Nice. And like reading off all the different experiences that you've been a part of, do you say that you have had one that you've enjoyed more than the other? Or I know this is a loaded question.
It is. I like loaded questions from time to time. I think that's a good one. It really does depend on the setting I'm in. So if and when I know I need to tap into that bag of tricks that I learned when I was a part of the Office of the President, then I'm able to do that. And I think that conversation point, being able to rub shoulders, so to speak, with folks who are presidents of a university, folks who are provosts, and doing a lot of good work in shaping system-wide changes and such, that for me was something I enjoyed. But I do know I learned a lot in that actual setting because it wasn't just putting on programs for your floor or finding ways to have fun with your peers. It was actually shaping policy. It was discussing ways in which incremental change that we see in higher ed actually can impact the next crop of students who have yet to even enter into the campus community. So I think a lot of what I learned in that realm really impacts the work I'm doing now, moving to a school such as Stanford, but also to a population of students who have very different needs and who also are working with and at a different level academically, solely because they're already, in most cases, have already obtained their PhD, or in some cases, because I do a lot of recruitment work, they're in the process of finishing up their dissertation and or trying to figure out whatever that next step is for them in their career. So lots of different changes across the board, but having worked in the Office of the President definitely gave me insight into what folks at different levels and at different viewpoints may experience.
Got you. Nice. No, thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So moving into the next question that I have is, what makes you happy? And thinking about one thing from higher ed and then one personal thing.
Yeah. I think whether it was the title of the podcast, I'm like, I really need to take some time to figure out what my answer is here. And I feel like I have a good answer, but we'll see. For me, a lot of it, and fortunately, I can say, as a former student who I work with, you actually are a part of this category. It's really graduation season. Whenever I can actually see a student who I've worked with or had a one-on-one with or met with in any way, shape, or form, walk across the stage, in some cases virtually or in some cases in person, it feels good. I think also, aside from that, being able to know as a first gen student myself, well, I was the first one in my family to graduate from a 4-year institution. And that also applies to a lot of students I end up working with. So seeing that level of pride for them, for their family, for oftentimes a lot of loved ones who may not even be able to make it to campus on that day, but they send their love via mail and postcards, or they'll send all kinds of different things. And by all means, for me, it feels good to see students who are at that point in their career, but it also feels good as a staff member to say, wow, I, in some small way, I would like to think help them to get there or help them to be able to stay there. I know a lot of students don't oftentimes stay in school for a variety of different reasons. And when you're a person who is a student affairs practitioner, it is your role to really help students to find a reason to stay, to find that sense of belonging. And that's something that over the course of the years, I've been able to, I like to think, do quite well. So finding students, getting them connected to campus, but also being that person at the end of a season or end of an academic year that can be an MC and actually see students and actually let loose and show them that we can have fun as staff members too. So all good times, I must say, for sure. And let's see, was there anything you mentioned also personal?
Yeah,
I think the personal side of things, well, of course, once you get wrapped up in work, I think there is some overlap there, but I do agree at this point in time with, I'm sure there's been at least 1 or 2 podcast guests who have mentioned it. I got a fur baby at home, and he by all means is, I would say, number one, and he wouldn't take kindly to me saying anyone else's. So when it comes down to it, you have met Harlem. Harlem is my 4-legged miniature Aussie who loves to run, jump, have a lot of fun, but hey, that energy has got to get used in some way. So I think for me, it's been really nice being able to have an active adventure buddy, somebody who wants to go on just as many, if not more hikes, somebody who enjoys being able to get out from time to time. I'm somebody who was born and raised on the East Coast, and I lived in the Midwest, hence the East Coast charm or Midwest charm or however I put that. But nonetheless, I must say that having lived in different places, coming to a place like California, which is super dog friendly, but also super friendly to people who are raising a dog and trying to find ways to enjoy whether it's a beer garden out and about or whatever the case may be, or going somewhere that just really will say, take him to the beach. Having lived in Monterey, there's a lot of folks who will just take their dog on the beach, and Autumn's a dog who loves to run in the sand and find other dog friends to play with. So by all means, I think that is my sense of happiness, be that at a dog park throwing a tennis ball, or certainly even just finding a way to sit back, lay back on the bed somewhere and rub his belly, because that's just about all he wants to do is lay beside me.
Yeah, and no, I think that fits you perfectly, because like I will definitely say I've seen a lot of people that have like amazing connections with their dogs, but I mean you and Harlem are bros. Like
That's
that
my
is the
man. It's my little man. He's super
that
photogenic too. So I'm like, hey, when folks need an update on how I'm doing, I'll post him instead, and it works just as well. So it
and it and
works.
it was comical because like when I was an RA and I was on your staff, like I just like I didn't understand. I guess I didn't fully understand when everyone wanted to like be with Harlem, and then like I think at the tail end before I graduated, I was like, I get it, I
He's
get it. No, he's
cool.
awesome, he's
He
amazing,
cool
and like
dude.
the connection that you two have is amazing too. And
Appreciate
something,
it.
and you had mentioned this too, and I think that that's like the thing that I like about the side of retention is I know that a lot of it is like numbers, it's retention, making sure that we have students that like are staying on campus and stuff, but I think it's that personal connection that you had mentioned of like seeing it through and like seeing those students and like the successes of like how amazing graduation is. Like you can have, it could have gone through a million obstacles, but you got to this point, and that is one thing that no one can ever take away from you, is that you did
Absolutely.
this. And I think that like that the emotional connection with the retention piece, I think, is amazing on what you talked about. So
Agreed. Agreed. I think a lot of the roles I've held, fortunately, have all been about relationship building. And at the end of the day, when you see somebody at the culminating point of that relationship you two developed, there is no feeling but joy, or
mhm.
actually at that point, relief, right? I know there's a lot
Yeah.
of work that goes into earning those degrees. I certainly know there's a lot of hours and a lot of sleepless nights for students, be that because of the work or be that because of the actual just academic components needed. But hey, as an RA yourself, there's a combination of sometimes you may be kept up and it may not have anything to do with school or anything to do with your assignments, but
Mhm.
those days occur. And I do realize that, and I do understand the importance of seeing a student succeed in the classroom and outside of it. Some of the best rapports I had were with groups I advised, or some of the different students who I actually just got to support that weren't just RAs, right? So
Mhm.
you got to see and understand the importance of area council. So working with those students and seeing some of them as, in many cases, a first or second year student. But I was
Mhm.
at CSUMB and some of these other schools long enough to also see that, wow, if they came in at that point and then they then wanted to earn a position as an RA, or if they then wanted to earn a position doing elsewhere, other things on campus, being able to be that person's letter of reference, being able to say, oh,
Mhm.
I worked with this student and I actually do recommend them for this position or for this, whatever they're going out for at that moment in time. So to your point, yes, it's a relationship and it's an important one. But if you're going to have students actually stay on campus, and I mean that literally both on campus in the residence halls, but also just on campus enjoying that experience,
Mhm.
then you got to showcase something that is more than just a textbooks or more than just a degree. I think being able to get that piece of paper means a lot, but there's a lot of memories I hope students are building in between that.
Yeah, and I think something important too is that reflection piece. I think that
Oh,
I
absolutely.
now that we are like 3 years post undergrad, for me, I looking back at it, like
Mm,
all of those things, like the connections that you make, I don't necessarily know what I did day in and day out, but I can recall some of those conversations that I had with people. I can recall some of those amazing things that I did that
so,
like that might not have been a part of my actual degree, but it was like everything that happened outside of that was just that makes it.
can
So
we name drop some YouTube videos or favorites of our own, TED Talks, things like that?
yeah, go ahead, go right ahead for it.
One that I know I've watched time and time again, both as a staff and also I remember first seeing it as a student, is that of the lollipop moments. Have you ever seen that? I'm sure I've shown
Mhm.
it to you, even as a
Yep,
staff. You've seen that one before?
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. So for the folks who are listening or watching or what have you, go on YouTube, type in lollipop moments, and I believe it'll come up with a very G-rated, very cute sort of introduction into how student affairs and making those actual connections with people can occur. And it can
Mhm.
occur very organically, very easily. And I think it does have a lasting impact. So yeah, I'm happy you've seen and that one hopefully stuck out to you a tiny bit.
Yeah, no, and I think it's kind of like the a tool that is used that I think that is. I know that a lot of times like we use tools and it's just kind of like you watch it one time, you're like, all right, cool, I get this. But like that's one that you can continue to use because it highlights how the emphasis on the co-curricular and like the side of student affairs that's so important, but also just like you had talked about, like building those relationships, you know, like it could take one moment of just being nice to someone and like providing them with an opportunity, answering a question, being there, like they could come in. And I think that specific example was when it was during orientation, if I remember correctly, but of like giving them that nervous feeling, and they provide that lollipop for them and they feel better and they see it through. And like you might not remember the person's name, you might not remember where you met them or anything along those lines, but you just remember that feeling that's inside of you. And I think that video is awesome, and I
There it
appreciate you bringing that
is.
up. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes. Yeah. I'm happy
So
you remembered. I'm like, hey,
yeah.
you just narrated it perfectly. So yep, you did
Yeah.
remember that. Good.
Yep. No, I know, because there's like, yes, I remember, because I know that you had showed it to me, and I think I had seen it a couple of times, but it's just one of those ones that brings it home every single time. So I appreciate you for that. So, but so the next question that I have is, what keeps you resilient in the face of some of the challenges that you've come across? So whether that be budget cuts, stress in the pandemic, anything, really, actually.
Well, I would say that's the $1,000,000 question in and of itself. I think finding a way to not be burnt out at a moment or a time like this is easier said than done, I think, for all of us. For myself, I very recently went through not a career change, but certainly a change in my position and the population I work with and the campus I work on. So I'm in a period of a lot of change. And for me, that has been one way to overcome a lot of challenges, is to remove some of the barriers or things that were causing me to not feel as inclined to be connected to the work I do. If you're going to stay in this field, you need to really be invested in the work that you're doing. You need to actually have the time, the bandwidth, the mental capacity to be able to provide for others in the same way that you know you need to do for yourself, right? And I think for me, being able to look at these last few months, really I'd say year and a half or so at this point, and understand that I'm not from California, so I didn't have those same reliances on family or friends and such that I used to at other points in my life. So for me, it was finding what it is that I actually enjoy doing. And that sounds simple, but it really was important, right? Like a lot of things I do because work says I need to get it done, or I do because it is a product of the place I'm living. But what brings me joy, or what actually does make me happy, was a question that I really hadn't had time to think about. So fast forward to a time like now, I did, and I have begun to find some of those outlets, some of those places where I can really devote time, effort, and attention. For me, I think a lot of it is taking care of my fitness, my wellness, and things of that nature. I certainly know I've been able to, over the course of the years of our time knowing each other, ask her, hey, I know you're into weightlifting and things of that nature. Can you send me a plan or something as I work on this particular component of my body? I think that's one thing that for me has always been helpful, knowing that if and when things were spiraling, I can take time to really focus on my fitness, and that can oftentimes recenter me. Now, I know that doesn't work for everybody. I know that isn't always an outlet that we can really devote time to. If you've got other things going on, or if ability status in some way impacts that, by all means, I think everybody has their form of happiness. But for me, I think really taking that time to focus in on, as an athlete growing up my entire life, I was on a field, a court, or a track of some sort at almost any given moment in time. It was either in school or at practice, right? So when you factor a lot of that in, it was those times or days at practice where I could decompress after a long day. I don't have that practice anymore because I'm not a part of a team. So I've tried to find those teams, right? Teams that can combine my love for fitness with my feeling of being a competitor, my feeling of knowing that I need to get out there and enjoy the experience of whatever I'm doing. And the best way to do that is to do something I've always done, or do something I've actually, we'll say, put a smile on my face in years past. So I think going to baseball games, I'm pretty sure we've been to one. Hopefully we got one or two more in the, we'll say, future at some point. I've yet to hit the new Texas Rangers ballpark. I know I'm not an Astros fan. I don't know how close you are to Houston, but we might skip them. But everybody else, I would love to go. And I'd love to be able to, since moving to California, I've picked up Oakland A's season tickets, and that is something that has certainly given me some joy as a person who not only played sports, but baseball in particular. Aside from that, been on a fair share of, they're a little expensive, but Warriors games, and even sometimes an NFL game or two, mostly in the preseason, but finding those ways to get active, but also to get myself in settings and places and spaces that One, I had never been before. So I like going to a new stadium or going to a concert or a show or whatever the case may be. But
Mhm.
those are the things that have always given me joy as an undergrad, as a person before, and we'll say high school, whatever the other sort of areas of academics we want to talk about like now.
Mhm.
But for me, having those places, those moments, those spaces that I can turn to, so sports, fitness, wellness, games, things of that nature, those have always brought Antonio joy. So they still continue to bring me joy. And I try to
Mhm.
tap into it as much as I can. And sometimes it works. And sometimes I gotta, we'll say, find another outlet. And for me, that may be at this point in time, I'd say the pandemic has really shown me a lot more hiking trails than I ever knew existed. So
Mhm.
I think yet again, going back to how Harlem likes to be able to get outdoors and enjoy some of whatever is seen out there. So I try to give him that. And I think it is helpful for both of us.
Nice. No, and I think that you were touching on this, and I was thinking about when you were talking through that question. Um, I think the importance of it's always going to change, because I think that it's not always just one thing. Because like I think that something that I thought about is there was a video that I was watching, and it asked like total strangers like what are your hobbies, and they couldn't answer that question. And I think that like looking back on it, like I think that we all just think that we have all these hobbies and like we should be doing all of them at the same time. And something that like I've noticed too is like in the like when things get busy and things like that, like you have focus on your fitness,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and hanging out with Harlem, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
um how I realized that too, of like how recently, because of semester's going to start relatively soon, and the one thing that I've been focusing on is like getting out there and like staying fit and like doing things to like for
Mm-hmm.
wellness purposes. Other things are taking a back seat right now, but that one thing is like staying relevant, um
Absolutely.
to make sure that I'm on, not burning out, like you had mentioned, like right from the beginning of your question, or your answer. So, and I think this is true, that I think the first conversation that we ever had was, I knew there was probably something about being an RA and like being one of the supervisors of the area, but I'm pretty sure that at one point in that conversation, it had turned to, I'm a Yankees fan, you're a Red
Yeah,
Sox fan.
there it
How
is.
is how is this gonna work?
It's natural. That rivalry runs deep.
And I think that that's the one thing that I've appreciated about us, is that like we've had that ability to be like to take it beyond the rivalry and like
Absolutely.
talk through it, because like it's like
Yeah.
that baseball mind, like I think
Yeah.
that sometimes we see conversations that we have with people and we're just like, oh, that was draining. But I feel like when we talk through things, because I know you enjoy baseball, I enjoy baseball, I don't enjoy the Yankees, you don't enjoy the Red Sox.
Fair. It's fair. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but those two things like brought us together, and I'm pretty sure that's why like we clicked, is because it was just kind of like, okay, we're gonna appreciate this rivalry and we're gonna talk about it. And I think
Mhm.
that's what was so awesome about like when we were like on staff. It was awesome.
Mhm. I think being able to have, to that very point, right? Like those folks who you can go to, and for you, it would definitely say be in a work environment, but nonetheless, it still is one that we became even after certainly you graduated and I now no longer at the university, friends, right? Like
Yeah.
finding ways to be able to say, we can still talk about sports. We can still talk about the fact that, today is August 18th and on August 17th, the Red Sox got swept by the Yankees. So, I mean, like, there's so many things that could be brought up, but we won't do that because we are friends and I'll be nice and I do respect that you are nice about it. So, no, all jokes aside, though, I think there are times where outside of those two teams, being able to talk to a student, being able to talk to a person who you were already going to have conversations with about things that you actually enjoy, right? Like that actually made the
Mhm.
conversation about work that much easier to have when we had to
Yeah.
go and make that segue from discussing whatever program we wanted to put on to, did you watch last night's game? Wow, that was wild, wasn't it? Such and
Mhm.
such threw a perfect game. Could you believe that? Right? Like it was always a chance for us to find things to connect with. And those connections, again, for us, it was sports. I'm sure there were other folks on staff who it may have been music, or it may have been,
Mhm.
you got some good music taste. We shared NF and a few other folks and such too. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think across the board, it is so, so, so important, especially when you're working and having a good working relationship, to talk about things that are not just work related and
Mhm.
to do that and not feel like you're stepping out of your comfort zone to do it, nor am I. So those are things that I definitely don't. take to heart, because especially now that we're not, well, it's a lot harder to have those conversations via Zoom about, oh,
Mhm.
did you watch? Like, everything's very busy. It's segmented. You don't have that water cooler conversation, so to speak, anymore. So,
Yeah.
or I guess enough for us, it would be as you're walking or doing rounds and such, stopping on by the apartment to say hey kind of thing. So
Yeah.
however it works out, by all means, I think having those connections that are not just focused on the ins and outs of what your job entails, super, super important.
Yeah. And even like having those connections within the job, because I know that there were a handful
Mhm.
of times where we would be talking about a resident and it'd be a serious conversation.
Mhm.
And then it would just kind of like that conversation would end and we kind of just be sitting with like this heaviness. And then you'd be like, yeah, so the Red Sox got beat by like 15 point or like by 15 runs yesterday. And I'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, well, all right, now here we are. Here we
Here we
are.
go. Yeah, yeah. Elephants out of the room now. Yep. Mhm.
So it kind of like it eases into it, and I think it kind of like rolls into the next question of like what are some of the ways that you practice self-care to stay on your A game.
Yeah. Whew. A game. That sounds great. Yeah. I think for me, self-care is a lot of what I really truly just focused on. It is taking that time to go to the games or focus on aspects of my own health, wellness, whatever the case may be. It is also whatever I needed to be in that moment. I think I used to have a definition that self care is X, Y, or Z, and it came out of a textbook. I then realized that that's not always going to be the norm. That's not always going to be the case. And some of the ways in which you turn to self care as a student may not exactly work as a staff member. So, as a student, oftentimes you have ways that if you're unhappy with the situation or what's going on or a policy or a rule that is passed down, you can advocate. You can talk to your advisor, your mentor, someone to get some insight on, I'm upset about this. I'd like to make some changes. Help me to do that. When you're a staff member and you're an agent of the institution in some cases, right? And you're like, you know what, this is eating at me as a person, that
Mhm.
hurts. And I think there are times when, of course, in every position, it's not institution specific, it's not functional area specific. There is always going to be times when you may not agree 100% with something that is passed down. And for me, self care is realizing how I respond in those moments. Depends on what my state of mind is leading up to it,
Mhm.
but also what I do after that statement is given or after that news is passed along or whatever. So a tangible example is, I think we talked about budget cuts before. I've been a part of a few teams that have started off a year with, oh, we're $1 million in the hole or whatever that number may have, it was,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure around that, but we are such and such in the hole, so to speak. And as a result, we got to cut your programming budget. Ooh, well, I think after that day, after that meeting or what have you, I know I needed to, we'll say, step away and be like, how do I face these 30 plus folks on be that one floor? But now I've got multiple floors and multiple buildings who are now going to be negatively impacted by something that they did not have any say in, but also that
Mhm.
they didn't do, right? Like it wasn't their fault that there was a budgetary deficit and it had to be made up somewhere.
Mhm.
That somewhere just so happened to be their programming. So self-care for me is finding ways to deal with the bad news in a way that is healthy. I think that is something that is important. So of course, I think we are of age now, and I'm not too far from Napa/Sonoma. So being able to find a good glass of wine after a long day is sometimes enjoyable. Being able
Mhm.
to come home to a loving partner who actually wants to hear about my day, but also is willing to help me to be able to process what I could have done differently if that is a situation that needs to be had, or what I can learn from the experience as a result of talking through it. I'm also somebody who will always give my family the credit that not only they deserve, but also the credit that sometimes they may not even think they deserve. Because when you know you have someone who, especially as a person where most of my folks are on the East Coast, they're 3 hours ahead of us. If I have to call you in the middle of the night, I love knowing that my folks will be able to pick up and they'll be able to do whatever it takes to make sure that I'm okay. Right. And
Mhm.
that for me is self-care. It's knowing that somebody's on the other end of the phone. It's knowing that whatever the situation I'm dealing with now can get better, will get better, and also has a potential to in that very moment based off of how I react or respond. So it's a lot of things. I don't have a pretty unique and or we'll say one standard definition, but for me, it is a measure of a lot of different elements, and how you mix them or what day in which you need to mix all matters in one way or another.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a key point to like most of the guests that I've had on here, is that like self-care isn't one standard thing. I think it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. And even just like the points that like make you happy, or the things that
Mm,
make you resilient, are always going to be different.
absolutely.
I mean, there are always going to be like some things that, like, I mean, fitness and nutrition will always be a part of me that is like always makes me happy. Being able to do new certain things, being able to be a little bit more flexible, being able to do this, being able to do that, like that makes me happy. But I think that not every day, there are some days where it's just like I need to take a break.
Right.
I need to put my phone away. And I think that even in this, during the pandemic, even though we're still in a pandemic, I say that very confidently, uh, that it's every day is going to be different, and every day is going to need something different. um, and I think that's such a critical piece, like talking about what you said specific, Antonio, about uh, the need of decompressing in that moment,
Mm,
but finding something to do rather than let it manifest or take out. Let's say you hear about the budgetary issue at
mhm.
9:30 in the morning, and
Oof.
you
First
let
day of
that,
training, right?
yeah, and you let that sit there. And then by the time 2:30 rolls around, you're like, my day is just shot, you know. And yeah, I don't think I was there for that specifically, but like
Wow, lucky you.
I heard some things. I heard some things, and I think that that's the hard part, and because I know that our staffs ha- amazing programming background, like, and had an
Mhm.
amazing ideas. And I think that's the hard part too, like when you have a student that comes to you like, I have this amazing idea, I need $250 to make it happen, and you're like, we can't do it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
having to say that, it's just challenging.
Tough, super tough, right? And I think on
Yeah.
top of that, for myself, self-care can be, if and when I guess I stand up at some point, you may see a tattoo or two. And I think for me, one of the tattoos or statement sayings that I oftentimes will stick with is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Super simple, super straightforward, but I think in a lot of ways it says a lot, right? I need to
Mhm.
have that courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know if I can't, I got to leave it alone, and or try to find a way that I do have power or influence to make that change. So that's a statement that I live by, a saying that I certainly try to make sure I put into my work. But self-care is really what it's all about.
Got you. So I'm going to ask this, but I think you just answered it. But what is one piece of advice you live by in your practice?
Oof. I had to think long and hard about this one. I know earlier on in our discussion, I told you I did some homework, and my homework was listening to podcasts and figuring out kind of
Mhm.
how I could prepare and meet the expectations or standards that you've set, which I know they were very high. So I listened to a few podcasts. So I ain't gonna say no. Well, I am gonna say a name. Natty Ice. I thank you. I honor you. I appreciate you so much for some of the great wisdom that you've also shared. But you took my advice. I was going to drop some pearls of wisdom here. And I think that true saying of when you know better, you do better is still so applicable. It's so accurate, and it says a whole heck of a lot. I think for me, I think that was something that her and I, or they and I, went back and forth about oftentimes, and conversing about ways in which you can actually try to make those changes, but also doing so when you actually know you have the chance to do it. Super, super important. I think that said it a lot better, more articulate than I did in this moment. But oh, it was so well. We can just drag and drop, add their commentary, and I think it'll be perfect. Know better, do better says a lot. For me, I think it also oftentimes comes around with work, comes around in relationships, it comes around with family, it comes around with all aspects of our life. So it's a piece of advice that I definitely live by in my practice. And I think across the board, we all can learn from it.
And I think something, it's great. And I remember you both saying that,
Mm-hmm.
during my time when I was an RA. But I think the most important part about that though is, I think the conversation that comes with that. And I think that you and Nat did, I'm gonna give you both so many kudos here, because you both did an amazing job at saying that this happened, and let's talk through it. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was kind of like, it wasn't done so in a negative and derogatory way. It was saying that
Mm-hmm.
here's what happened in that situation, I think here's something that we could change for in the future. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, not necessarily just move on from it, but like learn from it. And also, this doesn't like make you a terrible person. It just kind of like, it's just an educational conversation. And I think that you both did such a great job. And like, I had learned so much up until that point of my senior year in undergrad. And I think in that year alone, just like with the words of wisdom and things that you all had said, I leveled up, I guess is the best way, the best way to put it. Cause I think that higher education as a whole is it's like with student development theory. You don't necessarily understand it when you first learn it, but there's going to be something that comes along where you're just like, yes, that's it right there. Like that connection is made. And I think that a lot of the things that we talked through, you, Nat, and I, like for sure clicked in grad school. And I think that I appreciate it. I appreciate it so much.
I think that the fact that the conversations resonated even after they were had says a lot, right? Like the fact that, a conversation we had, be that in a one-on-one or maybe even in some team meetings or what have you, was something that you then were able to click and understand even better a year or two later, whatever the case may be, or as you were then doing it for your students or what have you. It just goes to show that once we learn that, get that knowledge, get that experience, we got to do something with it. We need to be able to, I think it applies especially in DEI work, but outside of that setting, when you know better, it is your responsibility to do something with that knowledge. And I think for me, we talk about privilege, right? Privilege in all aspects. And when you are a person of privilege or with some level of privilege, yet again, you got to know how to utilize it. You got to know how to do something with it. And this is one of those things that I think really hits at that, right? It hits at the crux of, I guess, what we're all discussing at this moment in time, which is how do you do better for your community, but also think about ways in which it impacts those around you, because it can't be an individualized mindset. It's not going to help us to get out of a pandemic. It's not going to help us to get to the next level in our career and our academic focus, whatever that may be. So I think it says a lot. Happy you also stuck with it and found some other wisdom or pearls and such that you were able to hold on to. Are there any other ones or things that you picked up from grad school? Now I can ask some of those questions and such to see what you've now shared with students or other folks who you're working with, even post-graduation.
I think one of the things, and I think I mentioned this on another podcast, or I might have just talked to someone about this, maybe like after the podcast or before the podcast, but I remember specifically, actually, I think I was with Nat's podcast, is Josh Goen. And when he had told me, like, probably the last 20 minutes I had ever, before leaving for grad school, that I had with Josh, we were sitting in his office, and it was filling out paperwork or something, or like termination paperwork, the fun stuff, and he asked me, he was like, what are you trying to do in grad school? Super simple, but once again, loaded question. As you can see, with these 5 questions are super simple, but like are very loaded. And I had explained like my plan, my goal, my career path, like everything. I want to be this, I want to do this. And he was like, just remember to always lift people up, always bring people up and lift people up. No idea what I was like. I thought that was like a Goenism. I was just like, that's, Josh would say that. Josh would say that, like someone was like, yes, the person said this. And I'd be like, Josh said that. And they'd be like, yeah, Josh said that. And then I think that it made a lot of sense. And I think that I made a mistake in grad school. I made a mistake, and it was with a student, with a conversation that we were having. And nothing terrible, but it was just the impact versus intention of that conversation. And after that, having that reflection piece and like talking to our faculty members about it and everything, I think I learned so much in that instance, because it brought me back to what Josh had said. And I at that moment, I was like, okay. And then it also brings me back to, because I think both of those things kind of like line together with know better, do better. And I think in that moment, I was like, okay, I understand what happened, and like now I'm going to correct it, and I'm going to be better in these situations.
And hopefully not make that, whatever the mistake was, same mistake again, right? Like you can make other mistakes, but by all means learn from them, and always continue to make that the process that you're focusing on. So I like that too. Lift people up.
And I think it was like, it taught me a lot of empathy, because like a lot of people, when we talk about DEIA work and how you name it, you have a conversation about it and then you move on, but you also like, you don't convict these people that do this. And I think that's the hard part about like living, like being privileged, being white. I'm white. So being privileged in those and like having those conversations that like know better, do better, and hope that it works, but not necessarily like determining this person that they're a bad person. And I know that like the binary is not what you want to do, but I think that like there's still room for growth. And I think that once you say this person doesn't know anything, or like it was a bad situation and like they're a bad person, then I think that all that growth that could be there is gone. And I think it's important to have those people in your life that like will talk you through that situation. And
Absolutely.
also the ones that like drop the seeds of knowledge beforehand that you can reflect on, and you're like, this is the moment that you're talking about. This is why Josh Goen said this a year and a half ago.
For sure. And I like surrounding myself with people, or around people, I should say, that also want to do better and want to seek out the knowledge and want to actually learn about these things that make them a better human being in the long run. So when it comes to having, whether it's a DEI conversation or not, I think people need to understand and actually focus in on, hey, I can actually not just read this one hashtag, but dive a little bit deeper. I can do some of these, we'll say, outreach and supportive causes or what have you, but I can also find ways to ask questions or devote time in that community or learn more about the people who I'm out here to be an ally for. So, I think you hit yet again the nail right on the head when you simply said, when we lift people up, oftentimes they're going to see your intentions through that action, right? Like if I know that you're in my community because you may not know about it, but you're trying to support us, and that us can be any of us, right? In whatever aspect that needs to be, that means a lot, right? Like I can tell people who are there for whatever you interpret the right reasons to be, right? Like the people to really devote time, effort, and attention to wanting to learn are a lot more, I would say, genuine in that space, right? They'll ask those questions, or their eyes will be big, but big not because they're taking it all in a negative fashion, but big because wow, this is a lot for me, but I'm processing, and I can take silence, right, from some people as a way for them to process and make sense of a situation. I can also take silence from others and see that they're tuned out, checked out, and not giving a darn. So I think yet again, it's super important to know the people who are around you. And when you know those people are actually actively trying to do better, you're much more likely and inclined to share those resources or knowledge or insight that you may have, or at least teach and educate. Because sometimes that in and of itself can lead to a person feeling burnt out, or a person feeling like they may not have, we'll say, all of the bandwidth to be able to take on the educational nature of whatever a person is now needing to learn about. Sometimes I think, to your point, I don't need to cancel a person for them to be able to learn from whatever their mistake was. I think there is some education that can come from a simple conversation, but surround yourself by those who also appreciate and will do the work on their own, and also will ask you those questions when they don't know where to turn. So we've had some good discussions, be that about baseball or obviously good teams to follow, but we've also had some good discussions about articles to read, things that we'll say pay attention to. I think being able to talk about ways in which certain aspects of our programs could be more inclusive, right, goes to show that we know the importance of advocating for communities that are not our own, right? So I think that is one aspect of putting people on your staff when you're involved in recruitment who you know are going to advocate for communities even when you're not in the room. I think you were hired because we knew that John would not only advocate for individuals who look like John, but John would also advocate for individuals who had no background similarities or what have you. And I think that is super, super important, because as a staff member, I'm not going to have an actual touch point or an actual chance to converse with every student in my community, but I know I've got at least one staff member who is entrusted to do that. And when you're putting good people around you, the work gets done, and the work gets done at a quality level. So yeah, hiring is just as important as that retention piece of keeping people on board and invested and devoting time to professional development and things of that nature. So it's all connected.
Yeah, no, and I think that it's that mindset that you have to have, that growth mindset, that even if you read all, let's just hypothetically throw it about, let's say you read all 1,000,001 articles on DEIA and you know it all, there's still some room to grow in that setting. And I think that as long as you're open to have those conversations, open to work with individuals that know way more than you, and like want to be a part of that conversation to do, like, to know better and then to do better, I think it's something that it just in practice it's something that makes a lot of sense, but then also is so important to know and to have.
Yeah. Very,
So,
very well said. Thank
yeah.
you.
It would go back to one of my professors, Tracy Davis, in grad school. You got to stay unfinished. And I think that it's just so true. So untrue.
All the way to the end. It goes back to that graduation piece. So got to stay unfinished. I like that.
Yeah. So, but no, thank you, Antonio. I appreciate you so much for being here and for answering my 5 questions. And yeah, thank you. Do you have any other thoughts?
Truly want to reiterate that same message. So thank you very much for reaching out, for sharing some insight about what you've been doing, even since that graduation point. It's always good to touch base and see kind of how things are going. Of course, we'll keep our conversations going around sports and fitness, but also about, hey, social life, about whatever's going on in the academic realm that you're now living in. Texas is a little different than Texas A&M as well, some of the schools and systems and decisions and such. So I'm sure even after this discussion, you should know, continue to check in. I think being able to now have a forum like this is great. I hope to be able to continue to check in and see how you're doing, how the rest of these podcasts go, because I think I'm now invested. You've got an extra listener now. So I appreciate you making my commute that much better in the morning.
Yeah,
and
no problem.
I think across the board, John, it does go without saying that I do love that mission statement. I do appreciate the fact that you were trying to bring light to a very, very dark world. I do appreciate that you're shining very, very bright, even after graduation, even after a second graduation with a master's degree. So, man, you're doing great work. And I think as a person who's seen you as a student, but also now has seen you as a practitioner in this field, I'm glad to call you a part of it. Many, many thanks to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And for our guests, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So with that, thank you again, Antonio, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, take care. Appreciate it, John.